Last week, Nevada lawmakers held a hearing on the Boring Company's so-called Tesla tunnels. And guess who didn't show? The Boring Company and Governor Lombardo's office. So today on CityCast Las Vegas, I sit down with Nevada current editor April Corbin-Gurnis and David Figler, an attorney and former CityCast host who co-authored an investigation on the Vegas Loop with ProPublica. We talk about the hearing and if it can actually make a difference. It's Tuesday, February 10th. I'm Sonia Cho Swanson, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. All right, y'all, this hearing on the Vegas Loop, why? What was it about? What was the purpose? What the heck was this hearing all about? April?
So it was the Legislative Interim Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, which is this committee.
That's a mouthful.
They meet during the interim when the legislature is not in session to talk about legislation, to prepare bills that they may want to introduce in the next legislative session, to hear problems, blah, blah, blah. Growth and infrastructure, as the name would imply, looks a lot at infrastructure. So major transportation projects, the energy and utilities, things like that, legislation related to those.
Okay, so our legislature does meet in the off years. Interesting.
They do.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
They do a little work on the extra. Okay, on the side. Got it.
Yes. So the Growth and Infrastructure Committee held a meeting last week that was 100% just dedicated to Boring Company and the Vegas Loop tunnels. They invited the Boring Company to the meeting to discuss their project and alleged violations of workplace safety and environmental concerns with the project. Boring Company declined to be there. They also invited the governor's office to appear and talk about the regulations and about some alleged wrongdoings that people believe may have happened with them and some fines that were levied against Boring and then taken away. The governor's office also declined to be there. They sent a letter saying that they had already explained themselves and that their presence at the meeting would be unnecessary and that they wouldn't be able to offer anything. Who did show up was basically OSHA Nevada, which is in the Department of Business and Industry. So they showed up to defend themselves and to talk about the fines and some the controversy there, which we'll get into. And then also the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection showed up to talk about all of the regulations and alleged violations in that regard.
That they had documented,
yes.
Right. So David, did these no-shows surprise you?
Absolutely not. I mean, Boring refused to respond to all of our long and deep investigative reporting on the conduct of the Boring Company.
Many repeated requests for comment.
Many requests, in all forms, down to the point where I videotape myself going to their front door with a list of questions, But, this is the second of two state legislative committees on this topic with different, elected officials. And I just got to say, finally, whatever your opinion is on the Vegas Loop, how safe or unsafe you think it might be, how good or bad a decision it might be for the community. Certainly the community deserves the sort of scrutiny of such a large-scale project that we have reported on and which I personally believe has not been enough. Prior to this last legislative hearing, the Revenue Committee had its own hearing, which Boring also did not show up at. However, at that particular one, no surprise again, the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority sort of took on the role of being the proxy defender of the project, which, has always been a little controversial and at least troubling to some. That, why is a publicly funded entity defending what's supposedly a private, self-funded project, which it is really neither. Yeah.
So give us a little bit more of the play-by-play. I want to focus on the second hearing because it's a little bit broader in scope. Mm-hmm. I want to know who was there and who said what. What were some of the major themes you heard emerge, April? Did you attend the meeting?
Yes, I was there. Okay. And, the Assembly member, Howard Watts, whose district includes the convention center, really led the charge on asking all of the questions. He started the meeting with sort of this long spiel about how he wished the boring company was here, and he wished the governor's office is here, and he listed all of the questions he wished he was going to ask them, so he had them on the record. Things like their approach to
safety, to the environment.
To safety, to the environment.
Responses.
There was a lot in there. And he made this point where Elon Musk, who obviously owns Boring Company and other companies, has gone on the record saying that he doesn't like the system where you have to ask for permission to do things that might be environmentally dangerous, and that he thinks we should be on a pay a penalty if you do something wrong method, which is troubling for state lawmakers who are like, we need approval for these things. And especially with some of the stuff David's reported about permitting and people are very concerned about that.
And the fact that they don't want to pay those penalties and challenge every penalty and fine more or less that has come their way.
Yes, he pointed out that they've challenged all of their OSHA ones and all of their environmental things, which happen both at the state level and at the local level with the Water Reclamation District has fined them. So they're fighting it tooth and nail. They also talked about how with the OSHA violations, you can contest them. And when you contest them, if you can't come up with an agreement between the state and the private company, it goes to a review board, and that review board has vacancies on it, and they haven't met in a really long time. There's a huge backlog. It's like twice the national average. So Howard Watts is asking the chair that he was hoping Lombardo's chief of staff would be in, why have you not filled those? Are you concerned at all that there's this huge backlog of safety violations and these things are sort of piling up?
Interesting. So there's almost like an intimation that the Boring Co. is expecting all of these kind of challenges to sort of die in the red tape.
Maybe, or maybe that it doesn't capture the public interest, so they could keep sort of stonewalling and moving forward with their project and deal with these various stories that come out, like those in CityCast and ProPublica and the Nevada Current, et cetera, as just being like short news cycle and people won't care. Which has been a very effective strategy for them. Not just in Las Vegas, they are trying to expand projects like the Vegas Loop in other places like Nashville. And they're kind of taking the same approach. It's like maybe the public won't care as much. Now, Nashville seems to care a little bit more than we do, which is interesting too.
More public outrage in Nashville. But yeah, a bit more. I guess what I'm wondering is, it seems like for the first time, we're seeing legislators kind of perk up their ears and start to say something about the Vegas Loop project, more than just like the one-offs on Twitter. Sigrid Bloom has said something about dumping site, once or twice here and there, but something that feels a little bit more publicly focused, more on the record, more concerted. So I'm curious, does a hearing like this have any actual impact or importance, or is it just political grandstanding ahead of a busy election season?
I think it's important, and I think it's about time that important questions were posed. And I think that the strategy of just business as usual, everyone will just ignore us, and we could keep with the progress of the project, has hit a important pushback or hiccup. And I think it keeps it in the news cycle. And I think it keeps it part of the conversation that we as the public should have, because this isn't just what was originally proposed, which is just a little people mover under the Las Vegas Convention Center, but something that impacts, dozens of miles and all the jurisdictions. I mean, they're even talking about taking this project up to Reno, which, is very intriguing. The way that it is projected, the way that the Boring Company has tried to control a narrative is now finally getting a little bit of scrutiny. So I think it is important. And I think this might be the mark that lasts a little bit longer than some of, the prior reporting that we've done. And I think that the reason for that is that most people, I don't think about this project because it is so opaque, because they don't go through the normal processes of public hearings and conversations. And
it's so literally underground, right? So much of it is not visible beneath our feet, and yet it's happening so close to the water table.
And when it is visible, they erect giant security fences so that Channel 8 can't take a look at, giant pools of whatever greenish
green water.
Yeah,
and exactly. Certainly, and to get to your question, so, like, certainly two things can be true at the same time. The Nevada Democrats are for sure hounding Lombardo on the fact that somebody in his office talked to Boring, and then within 24 hours, $400,000 worth of fines were withdrawn. Certainly that is a campaign talking point.
And what about the records that somehow went missing from
yes,
this meeting?
And there were records
the
that
calendar
went missing.
appointments. Yeah. Well, and shout out to Fortune magazine for really staying on it, which is unfortunate that an outside news reporting agency is keeping, us on task. But, we're trying here, too.
Yeah, but that can be true. But it also does seem, and as somebody who's covered years of these kinds of hearings, that a lot of this is driven by a concern for the public because, and I didn't include this in my article, but actually Representative Congresswoman Titus called in during public comment to talk about how excited she was that the state legislature was talking about this. How she had written a letter about this because she's very concerned. And I think something she said was, I'm very concerned about the safety elements of a project that is literally underneath the most valuable ground in the city. Like, if there is something that goes wrong with one of those tunnels, or if there's something, something dangerous happens, something beyond what we've heard now, which is, burned firefighters, receiving chemical burns. There was a crushing incident of a worker, but if there was something sort of more broader that could happen because of these tunnels, that could be really damaging, not just for the people that are in them or the people that are above them and all of that, but also to the reputation of the city. And I think it is driven by a genuine concern that should we be doing this, and with the issue of fines being pulled back, is that creating a chilling effect where they will continue just to get away with more? Or how far are they going to push it? And I think that's what we're seeing as a response to that.
Is that common? Is that common for one of our representatives in Congress to call in to a state legislative session or hearing?
It happens now and again. I've heard representatives jump in, or they'll appear. What's interesting is, speaking of, representatives appearing, around the same time that all this is happening, the city of Las Vegas sort of unanimously allowed permitting to go forward, to the Stratosphere Hotel, which is the first one that's encroaching into city limits, without any of these discussions, without any of these conversations about what is being talked about at the state legislature. And then, the prior hearing, the revenue hearing, talked about, like, is this just a giant giveaway of potential tax revenues, both in the rides themselves and the underground right-of-ways, which are being given to everybody more or less for free. It's really interesting the difference between former Mayor Carolyn Goodman, who voted to allow it to move forward, but with a lot of on-the-record hesitations about the project and its safety, which we reported upon in that ProPublica article with Daniel Rothberg. But also now we have Mayor Shirley Berkeley and councilperson Olivia Diaz, who are just effusive about how great a project this is without any of those other conversations that Mayor Goodman had previously raised.
All right, so we've seen stories come out about the Tesla tunnels now since, I would say, probably Fortune published their big investigation in, 2024, Dave, is that right?
Summer, yeah.
Yeah.
And we had them on as well, and that kind of gave us a little spark to do a little bit of our own local research.
Yes, right. So since then, we've had a lot of reporting come out about some concerning alleged violations, both environmental and safety. It's been a year and a half. Why did it take so long for legislators to finally say something, do something?
It's a good question. I think what seemed to really amp the game was when the two firefighters received chemical burns during a training thing. I don't know why that versus some of the other injuries that had been documented there really registered, but I think that sort of gave people a lot of pause.
And just to piggyback on that, not only to give people cause, but it caused the federal OSHA to initiate an investigation into the state OSHA as to whether or not they were compliant. Because the way that the delegation of power works is that as long as the state OSHAs are doing their job, the feds don't have to intervene. So it's almost like a delegation of responsibility. But if they feel like the state's not doing their job, they can intervene. And that investigation is ongoing. That was one of the conversations in the hearing for infrastructure.
And I think that lawmakers are just over the lack of them talking about it at all, right? Like David saying, of them not having a press person. Like, Boring CEO has been on record in newspapers talking about how the fact that they don't have a communications person, like they don't have a media person that directs things. If you look at broader issue of Elon Musk in general, I think I don't know if it's still this way, but when he bought Twitter, he changed the media thing where if you emailed the public relations people at Twitter, it would get a bounce back of like a poop emoji or something.
Yeah,
like he does things like that, where he sort of takes pride in, we're not going to answer that. Like if you've ever tried to reach out to Tesla, then the Gigafactory and those things, it's hard. They just don't, they're like, we are not doing any of that. When Boring sent a letter saying that they were not going to be attending the meeting, it wasn't even signed by anybody. That kind of made people mad. And also they said, we will not come to your meeting, but they invited the lawmakers to come down to the tunnels for a tour, which really made some of the people mad. Chair Watts, I talked to him after the meeting.
There's a good quote from Chair Watts in your story, April.
Yeah, and he says they need to stop giving tours and start giving us answers to our questions. And then so they're sort of fed up with that. This sort of like, oh, we're techie disruptors who are going to change the game and we can get away with whatever. Like, I don't think that
we're not held to the same standard.
Yeah, right. I think lawmakers are sort of sick of that. They said, no, you're coming for you're putting toxic sludge. It would people feel like that's what it is or whatever. And you're not explaining that. And they're frustrated with that. And now they're sort of tangentially amid all of this, they're also a Boring subsidiary is starting to do above ground rides. You can't call it a taxi because it's not a taxi. So they're regulating it differently, which is also making the revenue committee mad because they're like, well, what is this? What is this doing?
These are the rides to the airport. Yeah.
Yeah, the rides to the airport.
Right. It's cutting revenue the way that they've structured the deal. And this is the final leg, if you will, to pick up people from the airport, which has been very confusingly reported as the Vegas Loop now goes to the airport. It doesn't go underground to the airport. You have to emerge and drive on the regular surface streets in competition with Uber and Lyft and the other ride shares. And, of course, taxi cabs. And let's not forget public transportation and buses, which also go to the airport, which seem to be losing.
What's that? Buses?
Yeah.
Buses?
I mean, they're there. Why we're not focusing on that
technology.
is... Well, it's a story of the strip city, right? You know, why focus on something utilitarian and cost effective and efficient like city buses?
But David, shiny things. Come on.
Look, there's a lot of impact from this project, no matter how much they say this is just a private thing that we're not paying for. We have the right for answers. I know that, Boring has finally come to a point, either through these legislative hearings or some of the reporting that's happening, that they are putting out public statements. They sit down with sort of friendlies at local newspapers and, say, look, we've seen the light. We know what we're doing. We're going to be very transparent. And in the very next paragraph of said story, a question is asked and, the Boring response is, well, we've already discussed that. We don't need to go any further on that. I mean, it's very, very frustrating. And again, just to bring up Nashville really quickly, last thought, the mayor of Nashville, who feels that this project is being shoved down their throats by their state legislature, by their state authorities, basically came out with a quote which should send shivers down everyone's spine, which was basically, I just hope no one dies in this project.
Oh, my God.
That was his quote. That was the mayor of Nashville.
And Howard Wass, the assembly person here, who's sort of one of the ones leading the charge on this, also said something pretty similar. He was like, are people going to have to die for us to start paying attention to this? Like, he doesn't want to get it to that level. I think this is not the last we're going to hear about this. I've covered a lot of meetings where they do just kind of discuss something and it never comes up again. But they are, I think, actively considering next steps, whether or not that's something that could be done more immediately. It seems a little less clear, but if nothing else, then, legislation that could come next year that would hopefully bring more light to this issue and these issues.
That's actually my next question, because what happens now, right? I mean, it sounds like they have a long runway. We have at least, another year before the legislature meets again. Does the legislature actually have the power to make an impact when it comes to the safety and environmental concerns raised by local entities about the Vegas Loop?
The legislature certainly could give more teeth to state regulators. A lot of the penalties and those kinds of things can be set in statute. You could. So there are definitely legislative fixes that could address this. They could change the OSHA review board that I talked about, that they sort of are saying maybe contributing to the backlog of these issues not being addressed more quickly in the state. They could make it mandatory for that board to meet a certain time, and they could sort of try to get the things to stop just piling up, because it seems like boring is just letting them pile up and hoping that they will eventually go away. And so they certainly could do things like that. Yeah.
And I think another thing that the legislature can do, look, part of the boring approach has been to sort of machinate the type of way that this project is being described to avoid certain, at least local regulators from coming in, changing their status so that one agency that maybe was a little harshly critical is no longer involved in the process. And I think the state legislature can look at this project, much as they did with the rideshare projects, when those were first being proposed, and say, here's how we're going to categorize it. Here are the general rules that all the local municipalities have to play by to allow a project of this status to move forward.
Interesting.
Yeah. And certainly when we're in a national environment where boring is trying to get these projects in other places, lawmakers bringing up these concerns, I think, also has an impact just on how this is going to be well received. And I know
in other places, you mean?
In other places, yeah. And whether or not that gains traction, because a lot of these type of companies, they rely on hype, right? They rely on people investing in them and talking about them and seeing them as the future. And if you see pushback from influential people in a state, that does give people pause. And I think that could have a broader impact, not just in Nevada, but across the country.
All right. Well, this will be super interesting to follow. I guess we're going to see some BDRs at the end of the year. David, is that usually when the timeline for these kinds
might
of
emerge.
draft resolutions come forward?
I think the longer that boring kind of thumbs their nose at the state legislature, the more likely that you will at least see one or two proposals. How far it goes, I mean, look, the Boring Company and Elon Musk in general aren't without their lobbyists and their influence in the state. And I think if they see themselves in true trouble, some of those, like you say, BDRs might not see the light of day.
Interesting.
That's what we call the Nevada way.
But in terms of juice. Yeah. But in terms of legislature, the BDRs are usually due in about August. They're at the end of the summer. They'll have those. They'll decide whether or not what they're going to sponsor as a committee.
Well, we'll keep our eyes on that. And April and David, we'll have you back and keep us abreast of all the details. Thank you both for coming on.
I wish it wasn't me. I'm glad April's there. I mean, journalists, keep doing it. Stay on it, man.
We'll try.
David, you have a journalism is now built into your DNA. You can't get out of this.
Yeah, fair enough.
And that's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, go tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. Don't forget, you can support this show and get some great perks by becoming a CityCast Las Vegas neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Take care.